After this visit, it will be organized a welcome reception upstairs. So now I invite the first speaker, who is Stella Domestica, who will present the paper, The Masada Shipwreck, Cyprus, a preliminary analysis of the cargo.
Thank you. Before I start, I want to dedicate this short paper to Feather, another prominent Tropis figure who I'm sure would have been delighted to be with us these days. The Masada Shipwreck is located some 1.5 miles off the south coast of Cyprus, between two ancient and modern important Cypriot harbor sites, Amathus or Limassol to its west and Kition or Larnaca to its east. We started surveying the site in 2007. Since 2010, we have completed 5 excavation seasons, the last 2 of which were funded by the Honor Frost Foundation, Citavision, and the University of Cyprus. The wreck lies on a sandy, almost flat seabed and consisted of an oblong concentration of Amphora, partly or totally visible, before any excavation took place. Thus far, we have worked at the 2 extremities, the southern and the northern ends of the site, which, as suspected, were the fore and aft parts of the ancient ship. The keel, preserved to a length of 15.2 meters, was found broken and partly destroyed at both ends, the stern and the bow, because it has obviously been exposed for a while before it was buried. Traces of mortise joints on its upper part indicate that its fore end was approximately here. See also the location of the bow anchors in this respect. We strongly believe that the preservation of the hull remains, however, is much better as we proceed toward the center of the assemblage. The small part of the planking excavated at the stern area showed clearly how well the wood is preserved under the parts where cargo amphorae are still standing in situ. Mortise and tenons is the only joinery system documented at the planking thus far. What we have excavated at the stern, it's seen to be the area of the hull's bulkhead collapse. The cargo items were standing against it, were found lying on top of non-cargo vessels, all in red in this plan. These were utilitarian wares and some common black-glazed Greek pottery types. 3 or 4 deep one-handle cups and 2 shallow ones. 2 salt cellars and 1 echinus bowl with the initials, 2 letters, the Greek P, most probably initials, inscribed on the bottom. 2 unglazed bowls with very worn walls. A hitra with vertical handles and a mortar. Most of the black glazed types and the mortar have parallels that date to the first half of the 4th century BC. The cargo items seem exclusively Aegean. The vast majority of the cargo amphora in all tiers of the concentration belong to one well-established type from the island of Chios in the Aegean. This variant has a long cylindrical neck and a conical body ending in a dunce cup-shaped toe, which, cylindrical and hollowed in the earlier versions, became gradually solid by the end of the 4th century. Amphorae with short hollow toes, like those of the Mazotos ones, are usually dated to the middle of the 4th century BC. The second most common amphora type in the cargo are the so-called Soloka 1 or mushroom rim amphorae after their heavy overhanging rims. 8 amphorae of this kind have been found so far in various parts of the assemblage. This is a much less studied series, especially in its earlier stages, despite the fact that they are rather common. And maybe this is possible because they are associated with multiple production centers, such as Clazomenae, the Cnidian Peninsula, Skopelos, Paros, and Kos. The Mazotos amphorae have parallels with some late 4th century types, unless you have different suggestions, which was one of the reasons why I first dated the wreck in the 3rd quarter of the 4th century BC. The third group of cargo amphorae is comprised of 6 examples from Mendi in northern Greece. The first we discovered is slightly different than the rest and was lying in the center of the assemblage. The remaining 5 were found stowed in the bottom layer of the aft part of the hold, and we are confident that there are more of them still buried there, under and among amphorae from Chios. Mendian amphorae were commonly traded from the end of the 5th and throughout the 4th centuries BC and have been found in hundreds of land sites and several shipwrecks. The 5th century type with the lower foot was one of the 2 main cargo amphorae of the Alonso shipwreck, but the Mazotos type belongs to the later stages of the series with longer foot and more angular shoulders, similar to the Porticello and El Sec shipwreck types dated to the first half of the 4th century BC. Apart from wine, the Mazotos ship was also carrying a secondary cargo. At least 55 jugs were excavated at the aft part of the hold. A very similar type of jug with ring food and a characteristic ridge below the rim was, according to Susan Wotroff, the standard water jug of Hellenistic Athens. It appeared at the end of the 4th and continued down to the 1st century BC. The Mazotos jugs belong to an earlier variant with a more squat body and fabric very similar to that of the Chian amphora, although no analysis have been done so yet. Moreover, they were found pitched on the interior, similar to their counterparts in the wells of the Athenian Agora. This feature, coupled with the fact that they were accompanying a cargo of wine amphorae, suggests, in my opinion, that they should be classified as wine and not water jugs in this case, possibly a product of Chios in use much earlier than the finds from Athens. Interestingly, one table amphora with similar features was also in the shipment. This one. The jug's capacities are of particular importance. They contain 1 Chian kous, the local measure unit for wine. We do not know, of course, if carrying jugs along with the wine for serving and measuring it was a common practice, in other words, if Mazotos was the exception or the rule, but it certainly gives useful insights into the trade mechanisms of the period. Another possible secondary cargo of the ship could be olives. Thus far, more than 10,000 olive pits have been found, which sounds like an impressive number, but in fact, most of them, something more than 8,000, were packed inside only 3 Chian amphorae, with an average of 2,700 per container. The rest were found in the bow dispersed in the sand. 3 or 4 amphorae full of olives could well be crew provisions, although the information from the Xenon papyri, dated 1 century later than the wreck, suggests that Greek olives from Knidos and Chios in particular were traded at least in Egypt. The place of these amphorae, 2 in the stern and 1 in the middle of the assemblage, could also indicate cargo, although quantities matter in this case, and we will have to wait and see if more olive-containing amphorae are found. Elizabeth Briggs conducted isotope analysis on some of the olives and found that they were from diverse provenance. It had diverse provenance, but again, we don't know if they were all from Chios or not. Whether cargo or provisions, they provided sound material for carbon-14 date for the wreck. And this is Sturt Manning's work, whom I thank very much. The first results corroborate what is suggested by the pottery analysis, that the date of the wreck should be probably pushed back to the first half of the 4th century BC. 4th non-cargo amphorae lying on the surface layer were likely to have been added on top of the hold after the main cargo was loaded, either at the harbor of Chios or, and this is more tempting, during the course of the ship's travels from Chios to Cyprus. 3 of them, they were found at the bow. A rather rare type could be from Lycia, and it's probably dated to the first half of the 4th century, and an upper part of a Coan amphora, also of similar date, and a third one possibly for Samos or the vicinity. The 4th non-cargo amphora was found on the stern, and I haven't identified it yet. Any ideas are welcome. Apart from the date and content, one of the first suggestions that come to mind regarding the Mazotos cargo is the ship's tonnage, or in this case, the number of amphorae that were stored in the hold. Given the rhythm of our excavation progress, we will only be able to provide a definite answer quite some time from now, after full excavation is completed. Nonetheless, my research assistant, Irini Katsouri, and I have already begun to work toward the study of the ship's space and capacity, thanks to the Honor Frauds Foundation support. The first step was the volumetric analysis of the amphorae, in our case, the ones from Chios, since these were the main cargo. Thus far, we've tagged 228 Chian amphorae, but only 77 preserve their full profile. Based on their linear dimensions, 2 pretty consistent groups were formed. A small one and a large size. Their capacities, all measured up to the bottom of the neck, seem consistent also. The small ones could hold 9 to 10 liters or 3.5 Chian koes, and the large one 19.6 to 22.5 liters, clustering around 20 to 21 liters, or 7 to 8 Chian koes. Having established that, and in order to experiment with the storage system and the ship's space, we created a parametric model of an average large size amphora, which we used for what I will show afterwards. Then we worked on the number of amphora tiers. In the center of the assemblage, after the disturbed top layer of the broken amphora was removed, we used different colors to mark the possible different layers on a 3D point cloud. We then placed the average amphora models in these positions, and we saw that it was possible to have 4 tiers. This means that the hold's depth, at least in the center of the assemblage, should be a minimum of 1.70 meters plus any allowance for damage. Choosing the storage pattern was trickier. We had to decide between the zigzag or the square configuration as defined by Permet and Wallinger long before. The square configuration seemed better for the shape of the Mazotos amphorae, something that was confirmed from the excavation at the center of the assemblage. When experimenting with storing the amphora models, however, it also became obvious that we had to decide what the distance was between the amphorae of the lowest tier, because this would determine the rest of the configuration. Leaving no gap, as we see here at top right, was not correct, because some room was necessary for the damage, the material used among the amphorae to prevent breakage. Archaeological evidence of such material has been found in the Roman shipwrecks of Madrague de Gien in France and Boufferet in Spain. At Mazotos, a careful study of the 3D point cloud showed that there is a distance of about 8 centimeters between the amphorae at the bow and the center of the assemblage. We have yet to find damage in situ, but a lot of small twigs have been recovered, not only from inside the amphorae, but also, and most importantly, concentrated at the stern on the only part of the ship excavated so far, with the amphorae standing on the plugging in situ. Britta Lorentzen of Cornell University identified them as belonging to the Lamiaceae family, I hope I pronounce it correctly, which includes over 100 aromatic species in the Mediterranean alone. It is not yet possible to specify exactly which one or ones were used here, but it is certain that some of them, like sage, oregano, and thyme, are common shrubs in the Aegean and suitable for the purpose. Storage with gaps filled with dunnage must have facilitated immensely some documented configurations that are otherwise difficult to explain. For example, small and large Chian amphorae or Chian and Mendian amphorae stowed together. Moreover, the jugs found among the amphorae could not, in our opinion, have safely stowed in this position. Chernia and Pome's suggestion that tableware was stowed in boxes higher in the hold seems to explain better their current find spots at Mazotos, in a position that indicates that they fell from a height and came to rest amongst the amphorae that were lying on their sides immediately below or in the amphorae. How high the jugs could be stowed remains uncertain, but it has to be taken into serious consideration when the vertical dimensions of the ship are discussed. We're still in the beginning of our efforts to study the space of the ancient ship, and there's no time to elaborate more on this slide, but we are confident that as the excavation progresses, more pieces will be added to the puzzle of reconstructed and ordinary merchantmen, representative of many others that sailed between the Aegean and the Eastern Mediterranean during the second part, the first half of the 4th century BC. Thank you very much.
So any question for Stella?
Do you know what type of framing the ship used?
No, we haven't excavated. I mean, the framing, well, we have only one frame exposed. So you saw it. And so no. Well, we found a nail, okay, an iron nail, the remains of an iron nail on top it, iron, yes. And we have found many other iron nails, no bronze nails so far. So we found them in the sand. But no, we haven't exposed much of the hull. So we've only identified the extremities. So I cannot report much on this. Yeah.
You have a question?
Yeah.
Here? Okay.
Stella, thank you very much for the presentation. On the small trench in which you have this frame and planking, it seems, at least on the photo, that the garboards and the transversal section of the boat seems to have a boat with a section which is not wine glass shaped. Can you confirm that on the small window you...
Well, we have tried to reconstruct the curve so that we know what we're looking at, but it's not that this is correct. I mean, we don't have a big, a strong curvature, but again, it may be deformed, and we would like to say that after we have excavated a little more, we have exposed more, and have documented it better.
Okay, thank you.
Sorry, thank you for the very nice presentation. I want to ask you about the Mendian amphora. Did you do petrographic?
No, we haven't done any petrographic analysis at all. What I said is based on shape of typological analogies.
Because in ACO, I have we found the same we found the same Mende, and I did do the petrographic, and it was from Cyprus. This is the
No, I can assure you, I don't know if it is from Mende, but I can tell you it's not Cypriot. I mean, because I can recognize the local fabrics, no. And as I said, it was, okay, I don't know because we haven't done any analysis, but I would be very surprised if the Mendean amphora found so deep in the hold were loaded on this island. It doesn't make much sense. Macroscopically, the fabric doesn't seem local.
I'll tell you the truth, the color of the fabric is different but it is so similar with the shape.
Well, let's exchange information.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Just a small remark about the small jars. The Rotroff one, let's say, is elongated in every part of the. The neck is elongated and the body is elongated. So, as compared to yours are definitely earlier. There's no problem because there is a tendency that we see in the Hellenistic period.
Yes, Rotroff has said that too, but she told me she would never placed ring-food jugs earlier than the end of the 4th century. But it's a different site, it's a different type. Thank you.
Only one question more. Yeah.
You really saved everything. When you talk about twigs, you're talking about things.
We sieve everything, Jim. Yes, we're very careful with this because we know that we're excavating an undisturbed shipwreck, so we have to save everything, yes.
Very last one. Okay.
You mentioned the motifs. Did you check the motifs in sense of whether it was done by pre-drilling?
By?
Pre-drilling holes on both sides and then...
No, we haven't got that far. I'm just, I showed you what we have from last year's excavation season, which is just photographic recording. We're going back to record the hull actually, because this was not the objective of last year's season.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Stella.
Thank you.
Next speaker is Marie-Pierre Yezegou. The title of the presentation is A Wreck of a Late Antiquity Discovered in a Bank of the Port Channel of Narbonne, France.
Do you know for the show?
Don't know. Are you able to move? Sorry. I'm not able to move. Okay. No.
And after to change the diapositive,
Sure. Yes. Here.
This one or this one?
It's the same.
Same. Okay. First, I would thank the University of Cyprus and the Honor Frost Foundation for the organization of this conference. The study I will present began in 2005 in order to discover the port of Narbonne, capital city of the Roman Narbonensis province. These investigations were developed under both management of the National Center for Scientific Research, represented by Corinne Sanchez, and the Department of Underwater Archaeological Research. About 30 scholars and students are involved in an interdisciplinary approach, as Nicolas Carayon, for example, while 2 years. Considered one of the most important Western Mediterranean ports, Narbonne was at the crossroads of major land routes, the Via Domitia and the Via Aquitania, as well as being situated at the mouth of the Aude Valley, during antiquity. This valley offered a link to the Atlantic and provided a route to the Mediterranean for tin from the British Isles and for many other products in the opposite way. The research has revealed evidence of the existence of two parallel banks which channeled the Aude River along nearly 2 kilometers as it emptied into the lagoon the Romans called Rubresus, and a breakwater built in order to protect the eastern dike. Between the two banks flowed a channel 50 meters across and 3.5 meters depth. You can see the left bank at the north when it joins the breakwater. Archaeological excavation have uncovered a harbor channel first created in the second half of the 1st century of our era and extended and maintained without interruption until late antiquity to maintain fluvial access to the city. The left bank, lying between the river and the lagoon, was raised using large stone blocks recovered from the city's pagan monuments. Probably, at the end of the antiquity, an undetermined climatic event damaged this bank, requiring immediate repair. A wreck damaged during the same event was used as a caisson and filled with material to enable reconstruction of the dike on top of it. The boat is completely encapsulated within the dike and serves as a foundation for its raising. The wreck has been dated by its cargo, comprising mainly Lusitanian and North African amphoras, Almagro 50 and 51, and African 3C, from the beginning of the 5th century. There were also several Baetica Dressel 23 amphoras. This wreck can be added to the 30 or so wrecks from the long transition period, 4th to 11th centuries, marking the shift from the shell-first to frame-first construction. In the first system, shell-first, the strakes represent the major structural element and determine the shape of the hull. In the second, the frames take over these roles, as Lucien Bache and Patrice Paumet demonstrated. In 2014 and 2015, the preserved cargo and the Mandirac wreck were excavated. The preserved part of the vessel measures 9.40 meters long, 3.80 meters wide, and 0.8 meters high along the starboard side. Nearly all the architectural remains uncovered are in contact with one another, with the exception of two probably sailing planking. Transverse section for each frame enable us to recreate the buttock lines and the hull shapes. A complete topographic relief plan was backed up by orthophotography. There was also photogrammetric recording at each stage of the disassembly. Each piece removed was recorded photogrammetrically, drawn at full scale, and recorded digitally. Samples were taken for xylology and dendrochronology studies. The remains consist of the keel with its forefoot to the west and stern foot to the east, 28 strakes amidships, 13 to starboard and 15 to port, including one whale, 30 frames, some reinforced, and 14 sailing planking fragments, 9 starboard, 5 port, including 11 fixed and 3 loose. The midships of the wreck tilts up to 30 degrees to the south, its port side. In addition, while this side of the wreck is preserved higher up, it has slumped just proximal to, and especially at the level of the turn of the bilge. The wreck lies flat longitudinally. In the center, the bottom is flat with rounded bilge. The Mandirac 1 wreck has a long bow. 3 elements comprise the axial assemblage: the keel, its stern foot, and forefoot. They are joined by cade hook scarves. The keel measures 6.3 meters long. Its width varies from 8 to 9 centimeters. There is an engraved mark on the northern face of the stern foot near the step. It takes the form of 2 vertical strokes which cut across the grain of the wood. It cannot be confused with the neighboring fissures and resembles a Roman numeral 2. There is but a single layer of carvel hull planking. The strakes are laid edge to edge and joined to each other and to the keel by pegged tenons in closely spaced mortises cut into the edges of the planks. The interval between peg centers varies from 11 to 19 centimeters, more often from 15 to 19 centimeters. The tenons are not aligned from one strake joint to the next, but are roughly staggered in a king-crux pattern. The garboards consist of single planks 8 meters long, with a maximum width of 18.3 centimeters. On the port side, the second strake consists of a single plank 9 meters long. Strake elements are joined by oblique flat scarves, which vary from 50 to 85 centimeters long. The scarf layout on the starboard side does not appear to be random. The scarf on strake 5 north and 7 north is toward the stern. Strike 6 north is carved toward the bow. Thus, it seems the carpenters took the trouble to alternate the planking to obtain complete strakes running from stem to stern. In addition, the scarves are never aligned from one strake to the next along a given side of the hull. But such alignment can be observed between all sides. For example, both of the starboard and port fifth strakes are scarfed between frames 21 and 19. Ah, ça passe plus. Ah, okay, thank you. Strake 6 north had been partially replaced between frame 13 and 19 over a distance of 1.55 meters. Strake 8 north had been partially replaced between frame 15 and 18 over 0.60 meters. Strakes 8 north and 9 north had been repaired at the same time between frames 11 and 23 over a distance of 3.40 meters. The repairs between these two strakes, 8 and 9, is located at the turn of the bilge, a point of fragility. In each case, the original plank was cut in to receive the ends of the repair planks. Repaired strakes were fastened to the frames by nail rather than tree nails. At the repair point, the strakes are no longer fastened to each other by pegged tenons. The new hull planking element replacing the defective one had to be forced into the space created by the removal of the original pieces. They are then simply nailed to the frame. Each garboard had 2 trenails that are not structural. These trenails were used to fill holes where knots had been removed from the wood. We also observed the use of a square sheet of lead. It was attached to the inner surface of strike 7. The transverse element now. The vessel framing comprised 30 elements consisting of 15 floors, 8 pairs of half frames, 6 half frames overlapping the keel. The first floor at each end, the one at the bow and 29 at the stern, are cant floors. With the exception of those at the ends, most of the floors are preserved over their entire length and are extended by futtocks. The futtocks extended the floor starting at the level of the strake at the turn of the bilge. They are not fastened to the frames and are very dissimilar. Some are butted with beveled ends, while others are separated by several centimeters. All the starboard frames were removed in order to be drawn, photographed, and digitized ashore. Frames were fastened to planking by truncated conical trenails, driven mostly from the exterior. 2 trenails were used per strakes. Careful examination of the frames reveals that in some cases the number of trenails greatly exceeds the number of those whose imprint is visible on the planking. For example, at the right of the photo. Overlaying the underside of the frames on the upper side of the planking, we are able to distinguish the wreck functional trenails from those already present in reused frames. The internal longitudinal structure comprises 11 sailing planks fastened in place in 3 fragments of loose sailing. Signs of reuse are visible on the sailing planking too. Traces of 2 doubling pieces meant to support a mast step are visible on frame 6 to 9. The only evidence of a possible mast step was observed at forward end on the boat on frame 6 to 9. It takes the form of notches on either side of the keel on each of the frame. This groove enabled 2 longitudinal elements. This partner supported a very short mast reading on a cross piece linking the 2 partners. This system is characteristic of naval construction during late antiquity. It is found on numerous wrecks from this period. For example, Port Vendres 1, which is exactly contemporary with the Mandirac vessel. On the Mandirac boat, this assembly is very short. It spans just 4 frames. It is not situated precisely at the 3rd forward position, which was the custom on seagoing vessels with squared sail from antiquity. Nor is it located at the way forward, as would be a sprit sail. The more probable interpretation is that it supported a tow post. Such masts are normally situated in the forward third of the boat for efficient towing parallel to the banks of the canal. Some interpretation now to finish. The construction of the Mandirac 1 boat perfectly embodies the tradition of a longitudinal share-first conception in which the hull shape is determined by the strakes. The hull planking also plays a primary structural role. The use of peg tenon in mortises to assemble the strakes constitutes a network which ensures the longitudinal cohesion of the structure. This network is very dense on Mandirac wreck. Our current observation indicates that this interval is comparable to that of wreck from 2nd to the beginning of 4th century of our era, such as Saint-Gervais-III, Labourse, Lubbe. On wrecks from 4th and 5th centuries, the spacing is higher, around 30 centimeters. Not a single frame is fastened to either the keel or the futtocks. Probably the construction of the craft is much more older than the cargo. Sorry. The hull shapes show us a charge 8 to 9 tons, length 13 meters, and draft 1 meters. The position of the mast steps in the forward third of the wreck also suggests a service craft, a lighter intended for the offloading of cargo ships in the port access channel and the transfer of cargo to the city by towing. In fact, given the north-south orientation of the channel in the Mandirak zone, it is difficult to imagine sailing on this body of water. The river current and the dominant wind are both contrary, which would immobile the vessel for most of the time. In addition, narrowness of this body of water would have made proceeding under sail difficult. These excavations are not underwater archaeology, rather than a wet excavation, with all its inconvenients, as we regret it sometimes. Thank you for your attention.
Any question for Marie-Pierre? Yes?
You mentioned the overlapping half frame. Was it similar to the overlapping half frame from the Door 2001 ship in which they're scarfed and nailed to each other?
The overlapping are only on one side.
In terms of
And yes, and pass upon the keel on one strake more.
You implied that the ship was used as a caisson, if I understood well. So I'm wondering, didn't they bother to get rid of the cargo?
We suppose the cargo was damaged at the same time at the bank, and they probably recuperated the part of the cargo which was intact, and they abandoned the break Amphoras.
So they were already broken.
And it was full of stones added to make the boat sink.
Okay, thank you.
More questions? Yes.
Copy paste for the previous question. Mortise, did you check for pre-drilling?
I have not understood.
Did you check? Well,
Pre-drilling of the mortise. Pre-drilling. I mean, usually the mortise is made by chisel, but there are...
Yes, probably. We are studies. This study is not finished, so we are looking inside the mortise to find how it was cut.
Thank you.
more questions? So I have only an observation. I have no for you. I am working on a 6th century AD shipwreck sank or abandoned in a river, and so and it is built with a sound technique. My idea is that the inland ship construction is much more conservative than maritime construction. So, and your shipwrecks probably would confirm this idea. What do you think about this? Do you think? Are you agree?
I have not understood just the end.
Yes, but the construction in the inland for the inland navigation perhaps is more conservative than the maritime construction.
Ah, see. Probably it can be a reason, but a lot of repairs make us thinking that perhaps it's a long life boat too. The same two reasons.
An old boat. Okay, thank you. So I invite the first speaker, Mark Polzer, with a paper with the title Movable Feast Beyond the Maritime, the Phoenician Shipwreck at Bajo della Campana and Implications for the Orientalizing Process on the Iberian Peninsula.
Yeah. Oh, you moved it? Sorry. No problem. Well, I apologize. We're going to shift from ship construction to some more theoretical considerations.
Okay. This one?
Yep.
Okay. Slideshow. Okay.
The evidentiary value of shipwrecks has long been espoused by maritime archaeologists and has come to be accepted as well by our terrestrial colleagues and anthropologists. And great strides have also been made in maritime archaeology in recent decades in developing more theoretically based research approaches. Nevertheless, interpretation of shipwreck evidence still remains focused mostly or almost exclusively on maritime matters, routes and trade, life aboard, and technical aspects of ships, shipbuilding and seafaring. I argue here that with greater application of theoretical and analytical frameworks, the inferential potential of shipwreck assemblages supports examination of myriad other questions that go far beyond the maritime. And I hope to provide a demonstration of this in a brief examination of the cargo assemblage recovered from the Phoenician shipwreck at Bajo de Campaa, excavated off the southeastern coast of Spain and dated to the end of the 7th century BC. Just to orient you, that's where the shipwreck is off the southeastern coast, not far from Cartagena. I will examine in particular the lead ore and prestige goods that we recovered from the wreck and associated structural aspects of the Phoenician economy on the Iberian Peninsula during the so-called Orientalizing period in the Mediterranean, spanning the 8th through 6th centuries BC. And this term refers to the phenomenon whereby, as a result of Phoenician and later Greek expansion across the Mediterranean and beyond, the local indigenous cultures they contacted absorbed or emulated the Eastern customs and material culture that they carried with them, and such as these objects you see here. In simple terms, relevant to the Iberian Peninsula, Phoenician merchants settling on Iberian shores exchanged manufactured goods, craftworks, and other commodities with the local inhabitants of the region for silver, gold, copper, and other metallic resources. The vast literature on this subject has traditionally viewed this as a unidirectional process and the inevitable outcome of contact between the more advanced Phoenician culture and the simpler and passive or passively receptive local cultures that they encountered. It resorts to a generalized model of prestige goods and their redistribution, but this perspective is incapable of explaining why particular indigenous societies began exchanges with Mediterranean traders and why those exchanges centered on particular goods and objects. Now, the Bajo de Campaa Phoenician shipwreck was excavated between 2007 and 2011 under the auspices of the Institute of Nautical Archaeology and in cooperation with Spain's National Museum of Underwater Archaeology, now ARCA, located in Cartagena, where the excavated material now resides. When it sank, the ship was carrying at least 4 tons of cargo and equipment based on recovered finds. This includes at least 54 elephant tusks, which measure up to 1.5 meters in length and 17 centimeters in diameter. These almost certainly were sourced originally from Western North Africa. More than 1 ton of galena, a primary ore of lead, was recovered from the shipwreck site. Analyses of the material show that the ore is quite pure and devoid of silver. Results of lead isotope analysis of a selection of galena nuggets show that the entire load of material probably was sourced from a single location, most likely from mines in the Almeria province of southeastern Spain. The ship was carrying a consignment of tin in the form of 163 small plano-convex ingots, mostly discoid in shape, but there are at least 4 other shapes are represented. On average, they weigh about 1 kilogram and measure 12 centimeters in diameter. Lead isotope analysis of the tin ingots has revealed that most of the metal was produced from a single deposit of ore, most probably in the La Coruña region in far northwestern Spain. We also recovered 7 plano-convex discoid ingots and numerous small pieces or fragments of copper, and lead isotope results there showed a little bit inconclusive, but about possibly up to 8 sources, but mostly from the Iberian Peninsula. We also recovered 5 lumps of raw amber from the site, which chemical analysis has shown to be Baltic amber. And excavation recovered a wide array of ceramic vessel types, although each type was fairly few in number, and the vast majority of which are fragmented and incomplete, as you can see here. The assemblage is entirely wheel-made, includes transport amphoras, mortars, flanged plates, bowls, carbonated bowls, oil bottles, small unguentaria, cooking pots, and various other dishes, jugs, and pitchers. The type represents much of the Western Phoenician repertoire and placed the ship and its cargo squarely in the Western Phoenician and Orientalizing horizon. 2 types of Phoenician amphora are attested in the pottery assemblage. The type seen here on the left with the carbonated shoulder, of which approximately a dozen are represented in the recovered fragments, was produced in Phoenician potteries along the south coast of Spain. And amphoras from these potteries have been found throughout southern and eastern and northeastern Spain in Phoenician and indigenous sites. And most of these amphoras would have been carrying wine, although several on the shipwreck appear to have been filled with fish sauce or some other type of fish product. The ovoid amphora on the right is a type produced in central Mediterranean colonies, and the clay fabric from the examples from the shipwreck exhibit typical characteristics of Carthaginian production. We recovered 11 ceramic mortars, along with numerous fragments, except for 2, which had ring bases, as you can see one of them here on the lower left. The rest of the mortars from Bajo de Campana are tripod mortars. They are emblematic of Western Phoenician pottery production and are a primary indicator of Phoenician trade, influence, or settlement in a region. In Iberia, examples have been found throughout the south, in colonial coastal settlements along the east and northeast, and in indigenous hinterlands. They are most often found associated with amphoras, leading to speculation that were used for grinding aromatic spices and for mixing honey to flavor wine. A variety of small globular bottles and unguentaria represent receptacles for perfumed oils, ointments, or other unguents, commonly used in religious or other ceremonies conducted by or for priestly or royal personages. Oil bottles were used frequently from the 8th to the early 6th century BC and are found in Phoenician and indigenous sites on the Iberian Peninsula. The third major part of the ship's cargo was the consignment of more prestigious objects for an elite clientele. We recovered fragments of double-ended combs, each carved from a single piece of boxwood and decorated with simple, incised linear patterns within a center field. Several carved ivory pieces found include 2 small dagger handles with simple rounded pommels, knives and daggers, especially with iron blades, were common in the Western Mediterranean during this period. They carried prestige, significance beyond their practical usage, or the intrinsic value of their materials, and they represented elite social status as evidenced by the depiction of Near Eastern art, worn typically in pairs, as you can see here, by kings, supernatural beings, and other important court officials. The other ivory piece is a small spool-shaped ring base, again simply but elegantly carved, and this piece was the base for an ostrich eggshell, several fragments of which were recovered from the site. 2 beveled rim fragments and the ivory base show that the eggshell was already fashioned into a luxury receptacle for elite consumption before it was placed in the ship. Fragments of alabaster jars were recovered during the final excavation campaign. Some 50 jars and 20 alabaster fragments dated to the 7th century have been recovered from sites on the southern Iberian Peninsula and in Ibiza, with all but a few fragments used as cremation urns in elite burials. Many are Egyptian in origin and some carry hieroglyphic inscriptions. The ship was also carrying bronze furniture elements. These include the 4 corner elements of a couch frame, each integrating a cylindrical leg with 4 cuboid sockets, which would have accepted the frame support beams. Here you can see a reconstruction. We also recovered the 4 legs of a small table. The legs were cast hollow and have a tapering curvilinear shape, and a single horizontal crosspiece that attaches to the leg just above the molding. These elements belong to a feasting couch and the accompanying side table used in reclined feasting and dining, or drinking, sorry. Such furnishings are tested in the biblical warnings of Amos and feature prominently in list of booty and tribute in the Assyrian annals. A small hollow cast bronze object in the form of right forearm and hand clenching a stylized lotus blossom was found together with the bronze furniture. You can see on the bottom 3 attachment holes that would have affixed to some object, but that's now lost. The style of the lotus flower is typical of Near Eastern iconography and is almost identical to that worn on the head of a bronze figure of Astarte, found at the sanctuary site of Castuello and dated to the 6th century BC. The size and design of this piece suggests that it may have been part of a ceremonial object that symbolized rank and privilege, perhaps a staff. We covered also some fragments of bronze cauldron and other metallic vessels, and the upper portions of 2 bronze incense burners of Cypriot style, you can see here. Similar censers have been found across the Mediterranean and on the Iberian Peninsula, and 2 examples were among the grave furnishings of Tabnet, the 6th century BC king of Sidon. And finally, there is this slender wooden handle with a flared end and a drilled central hole, which I believe may be a fly whisk or a fan. The fan and fly swatters, as well as parasols and standards, were common royal attributes in Egypt and the Near East, and this object may have had similar connotations. So, if we examine all this material in sort of a typical manner used in shipwreck archaeology, looking for sources of procurement, production, the ship's route, itinerary, trade networks, and the like, we would come up with a picture of shown or illustrated here of regional trade with inputs from further afield, integrating through various emporium and commercial centers. However, the inferential possibilities are much greater when other analytical and theoretical approaches are applied. If we look at the lead first, acquisition of silver was a prime impetus for the Phoenician presence in Spain. These and other metal resources had been exploited by the indigenous cultures for a century. When the Phoenicians arrived in Iberia, they settled largely along the coast and left such mining operations in the hands of the locals. But Phoenician metallurgists did bring technological advances, including copellation, which the introduction of which improved both the quality and quantity of silver recovered. So lead was an essential element in the extraction process, as well as the advanced recovery of residual silver from waste and other byproducts. A recent project conducted in Spain and published, the results of which were published last year, conducted lead isotope analysis of some 113 silver production debris and 18 orientalizing silver objects from across the Iberian Peninsula. The results of this work, as well as those from analysis of the Bajo Campana Galena, reveal a seemingly illogical flow of lead across the peninsula, which I've illustrated here. But upon further examination, it appears that the Phoenicians had established a complex and sophisticated network that moved specific ores of lead between silver-producing regions with native sources of lead to others without. And in this way, they were able to effectively, although indirectly, control and optimize the production of silver from the Iberian Peninsula. Such an operation could only have been maintained through some sort of centralized control, which has important implications for the commercial organization of the Phoenician colonies on the peninsula. And then finally, if we return to our assemblage of prestige goods, the critical factor here is that they all are singular items or paired items. One dining couch, one side table, one ostrich eggshell cup, and so forth. So what we are dealing with here is not a cargo of prestige goods destined for trade, but one complete set of feasting equipment, complete with a supply of wine and perhaps a fish sauce. This was a specific assemblage being transported to a specific individual, most likely a local chieftain or some other important member of the local elite. When viewed in this light, we can now begin to speak of a deliberate act that can be interpreted best within the rubric of feasting, within the theoretical or more precisely analytical framework of feasting. Feasting, and here's an Assyrian bas relief that shows basically all the elements on the shipwreck in a feasting scene. Feasting was a form of ritual activity that involved the communal consumption of food and drink. Anthropological and ethnographical studies of indigenous cultures around the world have shown that every culture throughout history has some form of feasting practice, and while specific details of these customs may differ, the concepts and meanings and purposes are similar. In essence, feasting provides a universal language that can facilitate cross-cultural interactions. It creates and maintains social relations, establishes relationships between exchange partners, and consummates trading relations and commercial contractual arrangements. Feasts also involve the use of differentiating cuisine and styles of consumption to define elite status membership. These distinctions are based upon the use of rare, exotic, or expensive food and drink. Here, fish sauce, spiced or sweetened wine. The use of elaborate food service vessels and implements, our bronze cauldron, ostrich eggshell drinking cups. Distinguishing personal accoutrements, the daggers and staff, and specialized furnishings, the bronze couch and side table. Furthermore, this style of feasting relies upon style and taste for its symbolic force, and so is subject to emulation by those aspiring to higher status. This in turn can result in the gradual spread through a society of food and food practices and the subsequent demand that these creates for similar objects and commodities. Thus, feasting can not only provide the mechanism for the establishment of Phoenician and indigenous exchange relations, but also can help explain the resulting demand for Eastern goods that characterized the Orientalizing period. Together, the lead and prestige cargoes recovered from the Bajo shipwreck are helping to elucidate Phoenician commercial strategies for accessing local markets in the Iberian Peninsula, maintaining relations with their indigenous neighbors, and controlling production of their prized silver and other metal resources. Thank you.
Any question? Yeah.
You mentioned 152 small tin ingots, but you said nothing about sources of tin. Where do you think your tin came from?
I did. We believe they came from the northwestern region of Spain.
Can you speak to the microphone?
Oh, yep, sorry. So the lead isotope results indicate that they came from northwestern Spain in the La Coruña area, the Galicia area.
How did it come from Coruña to Cartagena?
There were overland routes that would have come down then through the Guadalquivir Valley, probably down to Malaga. So I think most of this, the ship itself and the cargo was assembled in Malaga on the south coast of Andalusia, and was actually sailing around to La Fonteta, which is about 40 kilometers north of where it sank. And based on recent work that's been done in the Catalonia area, I think it may also have been then heading on up to that region as well. Yep.
Similar artifacts are displayed in the Cartagena Museum. I've seen them about 10 years ago. Are these from the same wreck?
Yes. So the wreck was originally discovered, if you want, like 1958 by professional or commercial salvagers. And so they took some material from the site, and then not too long afterwards there were sport divers who also took some material from the site, and presumably most of that material, we believe, was later turned over to the museum. And then the museum itself conducted two inspections of the site and picked up all the surface material. So that's where all that material came from. It was just from the surface, exposed material. They didn't conduct any sort of excavation work.
I just, oh, sorry, me? Thank you very much. This is an intriguing shipwreck. I'm interested in the Galena. When I read the discovery of the shipwreck and the assemblage, I assumed it would be moving west to Tartessos, so that because Rio Tinto is one of the silver mines which does not have lead,
yes,
and needs lead to extract the silver. But you're saying that it's moving north.
Yep.
To which area would that be?
So,
I mean, what silver mining area is there?
Well, excavations of La Fonteta recovered galena from the same source as our galena, so it could have been going there. But it could also have been going further north to the Catalonia area. And this is why I say, when you look at the flow of galena or of lead around the peninsula, first it seems quite strange, because you'll find galena from Catalonia region in the Rio Tinto area. They also were importing galena to Ibiza. So, you'd think initially that would come from there because of the proximity, but there's no galena from Catalonia ever found in Ibiza. But there is galena similar to what was carried on the Bajo del Campana ship. So it's quite a complex picture of how they're moving it around. And it's also dependent upon the ore that they're using it to extract silver from. Yeah. There's some quite complex copper, silver ores that are much more difficult to extract, and so different galena would be used for different purposes.
Could we consider that galena was traded as galena as a mineral used for makeup and other things and color rather than for smelting? Because
I don't think at this time. I think it was, although there's quite a bit of galena found on Ibiza. And we know they also were mining galena there as well, but they have imports of galena. So there's some speculation or question about where that was going, but and there's some speculation that it was being traded or moved eastward to Carthage, perhaps. But I don't think in general this would have been traded as a commodity itself. I think it was too valuable for use in the silver production, at least during this period of time.
Last one.
Yep. There was one object you didn't show, which I thought seemed quite unique at the time, and that's that small column, the fluted column with the.
It's an altar,
design.
yeah.
It is an altar.
Yeah.
And part of.
I didn't show. There's a lot of things I didn't show because it was too much as it was to get in there, but it doesn't really. It's not pertinent to this particular discussion, but. It could have been part of the feasting equipment. There's quite often religious aspects to feasting, and it's still a big question mark that altar, exactly what it was and what it was going to be used for. So anyway, so that's why I didn't bring it up.
Okay, so thank you to Mark. And I invite the speaker of the last paper of this session, with Marian Cohen, presenting the Magram Michael B. Shipwreck Preliminary Report.
Good evening. My name is Mayan Cohen, and it is a privilege for me to be here with you today to present the Magan Michael B shipwreck. My study focuses on the ship's hull construction and its place in the transition in ship construction from shell first to frame based. I also have some information from inside the hull. The Magan Michael B shipwreck is located about 150 meters south of the 400 BC Magan Michael shipwreck discovered in 1985. The shipwreck was first discovered in 2005 by two divers returning from a recreational dive who reported seeing framing timbers, ceramic sherds, and stones. In May 2015, this information was verified by a sub-bottom profiler survey conducted by Dr. Deborah Zwickel of the University of Haifa and Drs. Ole Gron and Lars Ole Boldril of the University of Denmark. The shipwreck was covered in sand at a depth of 3 meters, about 70 meters from the shoreline. In August 2015, a water jetting survey exposed fragments of wood, rope, and a pine cone. Preliminary dating was corroborated by C14 analysis of wood and organic samples to the 7th to 9th centuries AD, which is the late Byzantine, early Islamic period in the region. 2 pieces of framing timbers made of walnut were sent for dendrochronology to Professor Manning at Cornell University. The samples are being studied and results are awaited. Typological studies of the ceramics and amphorae have identified at least 5 different types. The dates of the various amphorae correspond to the earlier part of the C14 date range. So, why it was decided to excavate this shipwreck? The dating of the Magan Michael B shipwreck is one excellent reason to excavate it, to evaluate the significance of the technology of its construction in the period of transition in ship construction from shell first to frame based. The second half of the first millennium AD witnessed a change in Mediterranean shipbuilding techniques. Until about a decade ago, it was widely accepted that the first ship found of pure frame-based construction was the Serce Limani, dated to 1025 AD. However, the Byzantine and early Islamic period shipwrecks at Dor and Tantura Lagoon have provided evidence of earlier frame-based ships. This process of transition has been one of the main issues in the history of shipbuilding for over 70 years, and many questions still remain unanswered. A long-term program of underwater excavation and research of the Magan Michael B shipwreck was initiated. 3 seasons of underwater excavations were conducted in May and December 2016 and September 2017 by the Len Reconati Institute for Maritime Studies of the University of Haifa. Due to inclement weather, in the first 2 seasons, we had only a few working days. Also, the site's location is challenging due to a small island which creates a meeting point between the offshore current and a local current and a disturbed sea. However, during the 3rd season, we managed to make 500 dives in just 8 days of work. In the course of the excavation seasons, well-preserved hull components of the shipwreck were exposed, documented, and some retrieved for further study. In the following slides, I will present information and some results we've acquired at sea and from the research. The excavation site covers an area of 25 by 9 meters. The shipwreck remains are oriented roughly east-west. The 2 end posts were exposed, enabling us to measure the total length of the remains, 19.6 meters. The maximum width was measured between northern and southern framing timbers and is 4.9 meters. The maximum depth that was reached was 2.2 meters, and the keelson and keel have not yet been exposed. The eastern end post is composed of 2 timbers connected by an elaborate scarf, which resembles the Jupiter scarf, an example of which was found in the Tantura F ship. The upper timber, which is broken at the top, survived to a length of 36 centimeters. The upper timber was made of Aleppo or Turkish pine, and the lower timber was made of walnut. The overall length of the end post that has been exposed is 90 centimeters. The maximum dimensions of these components are 12.5 sided and 23.5 centimeters molded. The minimum dimension of the upper timber is 9 centimeters sided. The upper timber of the western end post is missing. Initial measurements of the lower part were taken. It was exposed up to approximately 25 centimeters. Its dimensions are 13 centimeters sided and 11 centimeters molded on average. At this point in the research, we're not able to determine which end was the bow and which was the stern. Aprons were installed at both ends of the hull. The western apron was exposed to a length of 49 centimeters, and it seems to be almost round, with a diameter of about 8 centimeters. The eastern end post was exposed to a length of about 40 centimeters. Its dimensions are 25 centimeters sided and 22 centimeters molded. 56 framing timbers were exposed on the southern side of the hull and 63 on the northern side. The cross-sections of the timbers vary. Some have a round cross-section, others are trapezoidal or rectangular. The face that was connected to an adjacent frame was worked. Of the sampled framing timbers, 24 were made of walnut. It is suggested that the origin of the walnut is the western or northern part of the Aegean Sea, which may be a clue to the origin of the timber used in the construction of the ship. On some of the framing timbers, sealing material and tool marks, perhaps of a plane, were visible. The framing timbers were exposed to a length of about 1 meter, and it was noticeable that the molded dimension increased with the depth. On average, the framing timbers were 12.3 centimeters sided and molded, with an average room and space of 44 centimeters. 10 hull planks were exposed and documented on the southern side of the shipwreck, and 2 on the northern side. The planks were made of fir. Many of the planks have scorch mark on their inner side, which might indicate bending through a heating process known as char bending. The planks on the southern side were about 12 centimeters wide and 3 centimeters thick. The 2 planks on the northern side were wider, 23 centimeters wide and 3.4 centimeters average thick. Joints between planks have not yet been detected, so it is impossible to suggest how strakes were formed. Clamps were found on both sides of the hull, fastened to the framing timbers. They acted as internal wales, providing longitudinal strength to the hull. They were nailed to the frames from inside using both wooden and metal, apparently iron fastenings. On the southern side, on the southern clamp, are 2 inscriptions in the wood. They seem to be of the Greek letters pi and mu. There are 2 sets of transverse vertical planks, most probably bulkheads. The eastern and western bulkheads are located 13.8 meters and 5.5 meters from the western apron, respectively. They were exposed to a maximum length of 54 centimeters, but are longer. The planks are typically 15 centimeters wide and 4 centimeters thick. The appearance of concretions and the fact that very little remains of the metal were found indicate the use of iron nails. Round nail holes can be seen in the hull planks. The arrows point to the marks of the nails' heads. The average diameter of the nails connecting the hull planks to the framing timbers are 4 millimeters, with the head's diameter of 16 millimeters. 2 nails were used to connect planks to frames. On the inner face of the frames, there are indication of square 9 millimeters cross-section nails for fastening the ceiling planks and of concretions. And at this point in the research, there's no evidence for the existence of mortise and tenon joints. Although the measurements of the Magan Michael B ship are preliminary, it is important to compare them to other shipwrecks of this period. The surviving length of the Magan Michael B shipwreck is 19.6 meters. This is larger than the original lengths of the shipwrecks presented here, except for Do 2006 and Pantano Longarini. Naturally, the width of the planks depends on their place in the hull. However, similar thicknesses occur in 6 shipwrecks. At the moment, it is difficult to deduce much from the frame dimensions. However, it is notable that the sided and molded dimensions vary between these shipwrecks. The room and space is larger than that of the 9 shipwrecks of that period, but this could be due to the fact that the measurements were taken far from the keelson. As the research of the Magan Michael B's hull construction continues, the comparison will become more accurate and will perhaps allow us to reach new conclusions regarding the transition in ship construction. During the excavations, 28 amphora were identified inside the ship and documented, in addition to many ceramic sherds. 1 cooking pot lid, 3 bowls of different sizes with roulette decorations, and bricks were also found. Typological studies of the amphora have identified at least 5 types, including late Roman amphora types 1, 2, 4, and 5. Some of them had the Pinto decoration, and at least one had a Greek inscription. To anyone interested in additional information about the pottery assemblage, please see Michel Kreischer's poster, which is presented in the conference hall. The amphora were laid on matting, and in addition, large amounts of dunnage in the form of branches were found spread across the hull. Dunnage was used to protect the cargo from physical damage and to protect the ceiling planks from abrasion. Moreover, dozens of pine cones were also found, most probably used also as dunnage. 2 blocks were found amidship. They were 35 centimeters long and 10 centimeters wide. Both comprised of a single sheave, and contained remains of rope. In addition, a coil of rope about 35 millimeters in diameter was found nearby. Further study is needed in order to understand the function of these items and to gain an understanding of the rigging of the ship. Organic finds can be divided into 2 groups, artifacts and organic remains. The artifacts included several ropes of various diameters, some of which were part of the rigging. Also found is the remains of a woven basket and a large leather sack, about 70 centimeters long. The food remains may hint at various The food remains may hint at various aspects of daily life aboard a ship of this period. Well-preserved olive pits, grape seeds, pit stones, different kinds of nuts, and carrots were found. Dry fruits were usually pitted, hence the stones most probably came from the fresh fruit. The olives were identified as nabali, which were common in the central mountains of Israel and mostly known as pickled olives. It is reasonable to suggest that at least some of the remains were part of the crew's diet. Based on the archaeological remains, it is suggested that the Magan Michael B ship was originally at least 20 meters long. Preliminary dating, based on C14 analysis and the typology of the amphora, places the shipwreck in the 7th to 9th centuries AD. The ship carried a cargo of amphorae originating from various places, including Egypt and Turkey. Apparently, she was a merchantman plying the Levant coast. To sum up, we believe that we are contributing meaningful information on the Magan Michael B shipwreck, adding to the existing corpus of shipwrecks in late antiquity and to the study of transition in ship construction. I would like to dedicate this presentation to the late Professor Yaakov Kahanov, whose absence is deeply felt and whose wisdom continues to inspire us all. And thank you for your attention.
Thank you. So we have 5 minutes for the discussion. Any question?
Very interesting. You showed some amphoras that were inscribed
We don't know at the moment, but in case you're interested in further information on the Amphora, we have a PhD candidate, Michelle Kreischer is here, and this is actually her PhD, the cargo of the shipwreck, so she might know better maybe how to answer this. Yeah. Yeah.
Did the planking have butt joints, and were the butt joints over frames?
We don't know yet. We haven't found any joints, so we just have planks, but we don't know how strakes were made at this point in the research. So hopefully in the next seasons we'll be able to answer that. Yeah.
So you think she was shell first, or skeleton first, or both, a combination?
It is, although we've had 3 seasons, it is still too early to answer this question precisely because we are at the upper part of the hull. We still have many planks to uncover and frames to see, so I'm not able to answer this question at the moment.
So you cannot know if she was wine glass or flat bottom?
At the moment, no.
Thank you.
Hi. Did you find any traces of caulking material inside the planks or pitch outside the hull?
We have sealing material on some of the frames, but between the planks themselves, so far from what we've seen, we don't have any caulking, which is quite odd. But no, at the moment, no.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Okay. More questions? Okay. Thank you.
Now, before we go anywhere, there are still at least 30 people that had registered for the dinner, for Monday's dinner, and have not paid. It's okay if you don't want to come, but if you don't appear by the end of this day at the registration office, we will assume that you're not interested, so we will cancel the reservation we had. Thank you.
So, thank you for your attention, and the session is closed. See you during the dinner.